My name is Phil LaBelle, and I am the priest at St. Mark's Episcopal Church just up the road here. And together with Dr. Seftar Medina, I'm one of the co-founders of Southborough's Neighbors for Peace. And it is a great honor to have you with us this evening for our Vigil for Peace and Racial Justice. 5 years ago this week, Disney Pixar released the film Inside Out. For those of you who have not seen it, the plot takes place in the mind of an adolescent girl named Riley. We get to see the control room of her memories as the characters, the emotions, joy and sadness, anger, and others, try to direct how Riley feels things and how she remembers. The memories of her life get saved in little colored glass orbs that can later be replayed for Riley to re-experience that event and the emotions with them. One of the running gags in the film happens when someone from the storehouses of Riley's memories sent up the orb which contained the jingle for a Triple Dent gum commercial. Triple Dent gum, it makes you smile, and so on. The memory unwittingly gets played, and then anger, the character there, blows his top, literally, trying to figure out how that silly song got called up to the control room in the first place. I suspect that many of us have similar jingles or songs that you first heard years ago that somehow get replayed in your memory at the oddest of times. One of those has reemerged for me in the past few years after lying dormant for decades. The one that gets played for me at the most inopportune times is not a song for a product from the 1970s, but rather a ditty that I was taught at a very young age. This, however, is not a happy memory for me, because that little song of 15 seconds has at its high point a racial slur. I cannot tell you who taught it to me. I just remember singing it multiple times in succession as just a little kid and having the adults laugh. I could just push this aside as a one-off, a time when I did something that maybe made others feel a bit uncomfortable, but then I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit amongst an extended family and a community that were equal opportunity racist. We wouldn't call ourselves that, of course. We were polite and good people all around. But on that aspect, we were blind. We didn't see those who were different from us as equals. Vulgar epithets were in plentiful supply. And as time went on, and we should have known better, and I remember growing up, there was a girl in our youth group who told a joke using that same horrible word. And I felt uncomfortable then, but I chuckled and said nothing. I'm saying all of this today, a secret I hadn't even told my wife, Melissa, until just yesterday. Because it's important for me to recognize my own involvement in a system that has generously placed me in its good graces, while it simultaneously looks down on and oppresses others because of their skin color. As a straight white man with a handful of degrees, I've grown up with the system smiling on me, telling me that I would indeed go far in life. And it isn't enough for me to never utter that horrible little ditty again, making sure the words never cross my mouth, my lips, taking them with me to my grave. Nor is it enough for me just to shake my head and to offer a prayer when I see the news of another African American or Latino or an Asian or a Native American be harassed or beaten or killed. remembering to mention their names in a prayer the next Sunday for my congregation. You see, it is not enough just to be not racist, as Dr. Ibram X. Kendi describes it, as one who doesn't make racist statements or tell racist jokes. That is not enough. Rather, I must become anti-racist, one who actively works against racism, because that is truly what the opposite of being a racist is. And the thing that I need to do now, as do all of us who've grown up with the collective community smiling on us, extolling the places that we will go, is to listen. To recognize that it is far too easy to dismiss someone else's stories, someone else's truth, and say simply that I haven't had that experience myself. It is much harder to hear the pain, the fear, the trauma, and then recognize my own silent culpability. It's not needing to try to fix or sugarcoat or ignore, but to be present and to learn and to become an ally, which is, of course, why we are here tonight. We no longer want to ignore the systemic racism that has been in place in our country for over 400 years. We do not want to forget George Floyd, or Rayshard Brooks, or Breonna Taylor, or Ahmaud Arbery, or Trayvon Martin, and so many others. We want to take our place alongside so many others in this long and difficult work that has been going on for centuries, certainly long before I got here, to eradicate the deep injustice in our nation. Friends, this work will not be easy, but it is only together that we can truly make a difference. Thank you for being a neighbor standing for peace and racial justice. Thank you for coming and being here tonight, and for the work that you will continue to do in the days ahead. Tonight it is our honor to hear from others about this desire to seek peace and racial justice. We begin with a member of our town governance, Selectman Lisa Braccio. Lisa?
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people turn out and to be involved in what's going on in the world. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to say a few words. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a message of hope, peace, and healing. Per the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I quote, "I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear," end quote. I struggled with what message I wanted to share with you today. As both of American Indian and of Jewish descent, I understand the unrest. But as the mother of a future police officer, I worry about his desire to protect and serve. And then I realized this is a much larger discussion. Where we are today was centuries in the making. Many of all colors and races have stood together throughout history and taken a stand. During the Civil War, they fought for freedom. During the 60s, many stood with Dr. King for equality, and today we stand together for human rights. Our nation is at a crossroads, and the divide is tearing us apart. Change is needed, but that change needs to come from a community and a human level. We all play a role with our silence. This should be a time of thoughtful, meaningful discussion and healing, which is what today is all about. And again, thank you all for being here. What we see as injustice in the world is our responsibility to work to make a peaceful difference for tomorrow. Per Dr. King again, I quote, "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. We don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart of grace and a soul generated by love," end quote. Our nation's history is written on change. We have used many tragedies and many horrific events to create those changes. After 9/11, many Muslims were treated unfairly and their mosques attacked. During World War II, the Japanese Americans were put in internment camps and the genocide of millions of Jews. Anti-Irish sentiment during the 18 and 1900s, the American Indian through history has been portrayed as savages. One thing history has shown us time and time again is that not all people are bad, that most of our distrust and hate is rooted in fear and misunderstanding. But for true change to occur, we must unite and we must work together. Peace should always rule the day. The diversity within our country and our community is what makes us great and makes us strong. It allows us to truly stand as one. That diversity should never divide. I believe change will happen, but not through violence. The stereotypes need to change. All white people are not bad. All black people are not bad. All Muslim people are not bad. All Japanese people are bad, not bad. And all police officers are not bad. Only when we realize the good outweigh the bad can we move forward together to make the world a better place for our children. I will end by saying I have great hope for what our future holds. It is our moment to use the power of unity to mold it into something we can all be proud of. It is within our power to show tolerance and understanding, to teach our children that we stand together as one race. The peace, unity, and community and healing are the path that we must choose today to move forward. Again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, we welcome the Chief of Police here in Southborough, Ken Paulus. Chief.
Welcome, everybody. First, I'd like to thank the neighbors for peace for allowing me to speak here tonight. It's very meaningful that they included the Southborough Police. When I'm asked to speak at an event like this, I always refer to one of the 9 policing principles set forth by Sir Robert Peel, who is considered to be the father of modern policing. Simply stated, almost 200 years ago, the police are the community, and the community are the police. As a member of the Southborough Police Department and the community, it is important to denounce the reprehensible actions of the officers who participated in the violent and needless death of George Floyd. In trying to find some meaningful words to say this evening, I was listening to the radio on my way home this week. The host stated that policing in this country is largely a local issue. I thought about the relationship of the Southborough Police Department has with our community. It appears to be strong. However, like any relationship in life, with your spouse, children, neighbor, your friend, or coworker, it can dissolve quickly if communication breaks down or one does not treat the other with respect and understanding. I'll close with one of Sir Robert Peel's 3 core ideas. The police earn public support by respecting community principles. Winning public approval requires hard work to build reputation. Enforcing the laws impartially, hiring officers who represent and understand the community, and using force only as a last resort. We hope to continue to earn your trust and respect here in Southborough. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. It's now our pleasure to have Rabbi Rachel Griffiths from the Congregation B'nai Shalom in Westboro to speak to us.
Good evening. This past Friday, in my sermon to my congregation, I was reflecting on the confluence of Loving Day, an annual commemoration of the Supreme Court judgment on Loving versus Virginia that brought an end to state bans on interracial marriage, and Pride Month, this month of June. And as much as there's so much progress to be celebrated over the decades, I was reflecting back on those battles I'm wondering why it was that society gets to decide whether two people of the same gender or two people of different ethnic backgrounds, why is it that society constructed in such a way as to assume that these categories of individuals somehow lie outside of the norm, that society gets to decide who has equal rights? The underlying assumptions is that society is separated by race and that normative love is heterosexual. Those underlying assumptions are what people refer to as implicit bias. They're socially constructed ideas. And when those assumptions get baked into laws and civil rights, or the lack thereof, that's what structural prejudice is. There was a time when traveling when I would always go to a particular website to find places to stay. It was a site called Purple Roofs. And this site listed LGBT-friendly places to stay, or gay or lesbian-owned places. I didn't want to stay somewhere where my wife and I would feel that eyes were upon us, would feel perhaps uncomfortable or possibly even unsafe when we traveled to parts of the country that we were not familiar with. And it occurred to me that this is an experience that African Americans have on an all too regular basis. Not just where they might get to travel if they take a vacation, but how they pass through a neighborhood and other spaces in the course of their everyday lives. It's how and why a young man who's just taking a jog can end up being shot to death. And it is, in many ways, just a modern version of how it was in past decades, where a black man who might glance at a white woman or say something in passing on the street could end up being lynched. And it's why you will hear people protesting, saying that they see some of these recent killings of black men as a contemporary version of lynching, because the underlying assumptions of the one who looks at the black man and thinks that's out of place, that's inherently dangerous, that's suspicious, is inherently the same. They're both racist assumptions. In the Torah, it teaches, the Hebrew phrase is tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. That's Deuteronomy 16:20. Tzedek means justice, can mean righteousness. It's doing the right thing. And one of its close relatives in Hebrew is the word tzedakah, which is usually translated in English as charity. Linguistically and conceptually, however, there's a critical difference between the terms. Charity is derived from the Latin caritas, which means love or regard. Charity is an act of love, of giving freely. Tzedakah, on the other hand, is an act of justice, and it's understood to be an obligation. My colleague, Rabbi Jonathan Kigler, explains the intention of giving tzedakah is to help manifest a basic Jewish goal to enable every person to live with dignity, because every person has been created in the image of God. If you can give out of love, all the better, says Jewish law, but first you give because it's the right thing to do. And taking this concept and thinking about that phrase, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, there's a number of sages in our tradition who have said, why the first word twice? Why not just tzedek tirdof, justice you shall pursue? Why the double tzedek, tzedek? One commentator, Braccio ben Asher, who lived in Spain in the 12th century, teaches the double emphasis means that it should be justice under any circumstance, whether or not you personally will profit or loss, whether it's in word or action, whether it's for someone among the Jewish community or someone from the wider community. And in 19th century Poland, Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak of Pesachka looked at that double word repetition and said, this is to remind us that the end does not justify the means, The pursuit of justice must also be done justly, unblemished by invalid means. Centuries of our wisdom tradition so immediately applicable to how we seek justice in this moment. In the Talmud, another of our sacred texts, it teaches that the world stands on three things: on justice, on truth, and on peace. But then it goes on to say, but those three things are really the one thing, because if justice is served, then truth is served, and peace will be made. In any place where there is peace, there will be justice, they teach. And we have been hearing the converse, no justice, no peace, as a chant ringing out across protests, across our nation. And how do we pursue justice? The difference between being not racist and actively being anti-racist is whether or not we see it as our responsibility to bring about the structural changes that would make true equality, opportunity, and safety a reality in the lives of those who are telling us that this is not the case now. And that's really what this is all about. It's not about politics. It's not about left versus right. It is about love, and it is about justice. We all know the biblical injunction to love your neighbor as yourself. One of our early sages in the Jewish tradition, Hillel, reverses it to teach it this way: what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. In the words of anti-racist educator Jane Elliott, she asks of a white audience, would you want to be treated the way that African Americans are treated in our country? If the answer is no, she says, then it means you know full well what's going on. You know full well that they're not treated equally the same as those who are white. And if you know that, she challenges us, why are you willing to allow African Americans to be treated in a way that you would not find acceptable? It's a question that we all have to sit with, particularly those of us who are not of African American descent. It's upon us to do some deep listening and a lot of learning, and let us be guided by those who are seeking to transform their lives, their communities, and their experiences, so that we can be allies as we work together to try and bring about real, lasting, structural change. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Rachel. It is on our honor now to welcome Southborough resident Lizzy Narcisse to share some words with us. Lizzy.
I want to thank you all for coming, because acknowledgement is the first step to solving any sort of problem, and your presence here acknowledges that you recognize that systemic racism must cease to continue. My name is Lizzy Narcisse. I'm 21 years old. Sorry, I'm very nervous. And I have been a resident of Southborough my whole life. I graduated alongside the Algonquin class of 2017, and I'm continuing into my senior year in the nursing program at the University of Maine. I want to share my experience being a white passing biracial girl in this town we call home. My mother comes from middle-class New York and is a white woman with hair so blonde it could be white, box dye, and blue eyes. My father is from Haiti, a country which many of you know as poor, black, and where the notorious 2010 earthquake happened. but to me was known as the country that led the largest and most successful slave rebellion in the Western Hemisphere. My father fled his country under the rule of Jean-Claude Duvalier, Baby Doc, one of the most repressive governments in the history of the world. Growing up, I listened to my father's stories of survival under a brutal regime and police brutality. My father moved mountains to escape the injustice in his own country, to find himself at the very summit of it when he arrived in America. Not only was he a black man, but he was a black man who did not speak English. My parents have always felt supported by the community of Southborough, but nonetheless, I am left with questions about that. I fully know I am blessed to have been raised in this town. However, I am left to wonder if my father's race had any impact upon the experiences I have had. When I was younger, I wondered why girls would go on vacations to tropical islands and come back with their hair fully braided. Wasn't that black culture they were appropriating? Did people dismiss my athleticism to my ethnicity? Did people not sit with my father at basketball, soccer, and lacrosse games due to the color of his skin? Did women clench their purse when switching turns with him at parent-teacher conferences? Did people question his intelligence because he couldn't keep up with the pace of a conversation instead of applauding him for having learned English at all? I have to believe these things may have happened, even if unintentionally or out in plain sight, due to the built-in biases of white America. I grew up angry and confused that half of me was accepted and the other half of me was enslaved, lynched, shot, and mass incarcerated. I remember watching the scene from the movie Holes, waiting for the motorcycles to pass. I remember watching the scene from the movie Holes where Sam, a black man, is murdered for kissing Kate, a white woman, and crying for the fear that the same exact scene would play out in real life and butcher my family. This past Thursday, June 12th, marks the anniversary of Loving Day. Loving Day is the annual celebration that marks the 1967 United States Supreme Court decision in Loving v. Virginia that legalized interracial marriage. That was only 53 years ago. I want to use the privilege I have as a white passing biracial woman to spread awareness. I want to leave you with some food for thought. I don't want to hear any more white people saying the N-word, even in your favorite rap song. The N-word was the last word African American people heard before they lost their life. We need to normalize changing opinions. It is okay to change your mind. White privilege does not mean that you have not had a hard life. It means that the color of your skin has not contributed to your life being harder. Also, so much controversy swirls around the phrase, Black Lives Matter. No one ever said only Black Lives Matter. We know all lives matter. The phrase Black Lives Matter originated from the fact that we as a nation undervalue Black lives. The reality is all lives can't matter until Black lives actually matter. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery were the tip of the iceberg. Under the tip lies slavery from 1619 to 1865, Jim Crow from 1877 to the 1960s, redlining from 1934 to 1968, and mass incarceration, which started in the 1960s and still exists to the present day. Americans looted Native Americans, kidnapped Africans from their home country, sold them, and built this country off racism. But we cannot fight hate with more hate. We must soften each other's hardened hearts, stand in solidarity, and fight this fight. It is not whites versus blacks, it is racists versus everyone else. A word about the videos. A word about the videos, and you all know what videos I am talking about. I understand that without these videos, there would be no public outcry, and therefore, no justice, which is sad within itself. But also please understand that videos of black people being beaten and killed is nothing short of traumatic to the black community. I ask that instead of replaying these videos, you relay resources. Lastly, if a conversation is hard to have, it is usually one worth having. Start these conversations, change your opinions, and most of all, educate yourself and others. Sign petitions, donate to civil rights organizations, bail, legal defense, and education funds. Be present on social media, and most importantly, vote. To my black brothers and sisters, I will never leave your side. There is only one side in this, and it is yours. You will never be alone again. You were never supposed to be. Thank you.
Lizzy, thank you so much. It's now our honor to welcome our local state senator, Jamie Eldridge, to speak to us. Jamie.
First of all, how amazing is it to hear from young people of color speak about their experiences? Thank you so much for speaking out. That was incredible. I want to thank Freddie Gillespie for inviting me to speak at this Vigil and anti-racism rally. And it's wonderful to be with religious leaders and people of all backgrounds from Southborough. Really honored to represent you. And I want to give regrets from Representative Carolyn Dykema, who would have been here but had some health issues. You know, we're here to remember and condemn police brutality, the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And for those who have read the news over the past 2 days, Friday night, the killing of Rashard Brooks in Atlanta. And tens of thousands of black men and women just over the past 30 or 40 years in America. You know, a couple days after the murder of George Floyd, the Black and Latino Legislators Caucus had a press conference in front of the State House that a number of white legislators attended, including myself. And they laid out a 10-point agenda to address police brutality, which I won't go into detail tonight. But the message that Black and Latino legislators, incredibly underrepresented in the Massachusetts legislature, said to us that day was, it is time now for white people, including white elected officials, white people in power, to listen to our black and brown communities and our black and brown leaders. And we did that day, and we need to continue to do that. And you know, it's important to highlight, as previous speakers have said, is that this isn't just about police brutality, but it's about systemic racism, and how do we address that structural racism, that whether or not we're contributing to that as white people benefit from that. And I want to highlight a few statistics just to sort of highlight the inequalities that exist. And again, this is in Massachusetts, okay? In Boston, a report from several years ago, The Color of Wealth. The median household wealth of a white family in Boston is $247,000, mostly through home ownership. The median household wealth of a black family in Boston, and I'm not exaggerating, is $8. The Boston Police Department recently released its numbers of stopping residents of Boston. And although black residents make up only 25% of the city, 70% of those stops by police are African Americans. And on health care, and this is something that has really made those disparities all the more clear, is that from COVID-19, black residents in Massachusetts are 2.5 times more likely to be COVID-19 positive than white people. And think about all the things that lead to those healthcare disparities. I spoke a week and a half ago in the city of Marlborough to a similar crowd. And for those who haven't seen, in the center of Marlborough is the John Brown Bell. And John Brown led an insurrection, an abolitionist, in 1859 at Harper's Ferry in West Virginia. And it's important to remember that 1859 marked 250 years after the first black slave arrived on the shores of Virginia. So think about that frustration. 250 years later, and slavery still hadn't been ended. Here in Massachusetts, we're celebrating the arrival, or commemorating the arrival of pilgrims colonizing Massachusetts, the Plymouth Bay Colony. That there was a black slave in the Americas before the pilgrims came to Massachusetts. And when we talk about systemic racism, and most of this is at the state and federal government, but I think we all play our roles, is issues that are absolutely critical to addressing and reforming if we're really serious about stopping police brutality. So I'm talking about voting. Think about the different barriers we put, even here in Massachusetts, that create barriers to black and brown people from voting. Housing, especially sensitive issue in the suburbs. What are the decisions that we are making at the state level or the local level to make sure that people of all backgrounds are welcome in our communities? Education. You know, I can't tell how many constituents that are in wonderful public schools, like throughout Metro West, that say, well, geez, oh, you came from Boston, you came from Quincy, those are bad schools. What is that saying? What is that saying to those more diverse communities? Healthcare, talking about the COVID-19 health disparities and the barriers to access to great healthcare. In criminal justice reform, which was eloquently talked about, talking about the war on drugs, that even though white and black people use drugs in the same percent, 6 times as many African Americans or black Americans are incarcerated than white Americans for drug crimes. So we need to think about these things, again, the bigger level, but at the local level as well. And, you know, this weekend I had the chance to listen to a video presentation by Professor Robin DiAngelo. She's the author of White Fragility. And the question she asked is, how often do white people think about racial injustice? We might be thinking about it right now, but are we going to be thinking about it tonight? Are we going to be thinking about it tomorrow? What actions are we willing to take to address that structural racism? In my hometown of Acton, a Ugandan American constituent of mine named Vivian Burchall created a video to hear from youth of color who graduated from Acton Boxer Regional High School, the high school I went to. And I spent a little time over the weekend listening to the voices of these young black men and women. And they talked about the microaggressions that they still haven't forgotten 4 or 5 years later. I didn't know that you played tennis. Oh, wow, you're in the AP history class? Or, well, you're so well-spoken, I didn't know that you were black. So these are the voices of our youth of color, and it's important to highlight that they are leading this effort across this country. And as someone that has attended many protests, as someone who's intimately involved with criminal justice reform at the State House, I really do see a change in the protests that have been led by young people over the past 2 weeks, and that's incredibly inspiring. But we need to make sure to support youth. We need to continue to speak out against racial injustice. And again, after tonight's vigil is over, let's continue to keep thinking about what we can do, especially for white residents, to combat racial injustice. So it's an honor to be here with you tonight. I'm very proud to represent you, and thank you so much for having me.
Senator, thank you. At this time, it is our honor to welcome Southborough resident Dave Joyner to speak to us. Dave.
Good evening, everybody. My name is David Joyner. I've lived in Southborough for over 30 years, or almost 30 years. I live with my wife, Sue. She's over there. She's a dean at Framingham State University, and it's great to see her colleagues here supporting her. My family's experience is quite a bit like Lizzy's family's experience. A biracial family living in Southborough. And I want to say, in my eyes, how this evening came together. One of my neighbors, McKinley Hackett, also African American, McKinley. He sent a text to me and Franklin Hooker, the two other African Americans, and he said, "You think we should go to Southborough Police and introduce ourselves?" This was after the George Floyd incident and the subsequent protests, and he says we should kind of get people to know who we are. And you know, being self-righteous, I said I will only do that as if we can be part of a conversation to make progress. I thought that would be the end of it. And a day later, he sent me a note saying, "Oh, we got you. We put together this vigil, and you're speaking at it." Yeah. So I chatted with Pastor Eastman, and he told me, he said, "David, you can say anything you want, but you only have 5 minutes." All right, so in my 5 minutes, I figured, what can I do to lend my voice to this conversation? A conversation, by the way, which is long overdue, and it's awesome to see this place filled with people here tonight to have this conversation. First, one of the reflections that I have is Sue and I, we have 2 daughters. And the experience that they described to us was much like what you heard from Lizzy. They described as being African American or biracial in a town where there's not much diversity. And what became really difficult for Sue and I was to hear from them, hear them say, "Why did you make the choice to move to this town?" Well, it became a burden for us in terms of being one of the only black people in our classes. And it was hurtful for us to kind of hear that and to process that. But what I can say is, through their life experiences, we're very proud of them because, like what you heard tonight, they're questioning the status quo. They're questioning the norm. And we're very happy that this generation is leading a conversation that, again, is long overdue. For myself, my own experience living in Southborough, first of all, I grew up in the Bronx, New York. One of 5 boys raised by a single parent, working 2 jobs. One of my brothers, Russ, who's sadly no longer with us, was a prominent football player for the Boston College Eagles. He was the captain of the 1982 team that went to their first bowl in over 40 years. He played with Doug Flutie. In that bowl, they played against Bo Jackson and Auburn. And I learned quite a bit from Russ on how to be and how to maintain sort of a dignified approach when everyone looks at you as the black guy. In this town, one of the couple of experiences that I've had, one November day morning, our doorbell rang. I answered the door, and it was a young mom and her son. He was a Boy Scout. He was selling holiday wreaths. And he was about to launch into his speech about what he was there for, but she stopped him before he got started. And she asked me a question. And it is what Senator Eldridge referred to. She asked me, she said, the first question she asked me was, do you live here? Now, in a million years, I would go to somebody's house, not ring their bell, and ask them if they lived there. And she probably didn't mean much by it, but it was when she saw a black man answer the door, that was the thing that roamed in her head. Do you live here? I could hear the steam coming off my wife's head in the background when she heard it. So she did a little kind of poll, and she asked our neighbors, were you asked this question? And no, of course not. No one else was asked that question. And what that tells me is it's again, Senator Eldridge referred to as a microaggression. It's important for us to be mindful of the shadow that you cast, the message that you send, the messaging that you send to that young man who was about to do what he was doing with every household, but that's the way that the interaction started. Fast forward to another conversation my wife had as she was walking the neighborhood. A young girl came up to her as she was walking, and she pointed to our house and she said, you know, if you ring the doorbell at that house, a black man answers. And again, think about this. If you're aware of the shadow that you cast and the messaging that you give, that's a message that's delivered to that young child, and then she carries that message with her to school. That message then gets transferred to people who, like my family, are made to feel unwelcome. So this message, this conversation tonight is about being uncomfortable. You don't change anything by being comfortable. And all the speakers that preceded me have shared messages of why we need to kind of shake the status quo. My belief is that through experiences like this, conversations like this, it's only the beginning. Because if this is where it ends, then things won't change. I'd like to close by just sharing a few quotes by Martin Luther King. These quotes are just as powerful today as when he made them in the 1960s. One of the things he said is, a riot is the language of the unheard. And we've seen a lot of instances where people have expressed their frustration with systemic racism, things that have not changed, and they've manifested in what appears to be riots. Now, there's lots of conversations about who's actually doing that. But it's important that if you don't address the issues that are presented to us, then people will take other means to resolve them. A riot is the language of the unheard. Another thing he said is, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So it's important that people speak out and be active in dealing with issues of racism. Don't just say, I'm not racist. We've heard earlier from one of the speakers is you have to be anti-racist. Dr. King also said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And the final quote I'll leave with you, he said, the time is always right to do what's right. Thank you for having me tonight, and Black Lives Matter.
David, thank you so much. And now we have some high school students, Mikhail and Sarah Medina, Noah and Olivia LaBelle, and Gavin Weinberg, who will be reading a short essay for us.
Shola Richards, an author and keynote speaker, civil rights activist, and a Massachusetts native currently living in an affluent suburb of Los Angeles. A father in his 40s who loves sports, superhero movies, doing laundry, and meditation. He considers his proudest moments to be writing 2 best-selling novels, going together, and making work, along with the birth of his 2 daughters. So he seems like any other American. Yet, when he goes for walks with his dog and with his daughters, what runs through his mind is something no one should ever have to experience. Through his eyes, he must admit,
I will be scared to death to take these walks without my girls and my dog. In fact, in the 4 years in living in my house, I have never taken a walk outside my neighborhood alone, and probably never will. Sure, some of you think that I'm being melodramatic or that I'm playing the race card. I still have no clue what that means, but this is my reality. When I'm walking down the street holding my young daughter's hand and walking my sweet fluffy dog, I'm just a loving dad and a pet owner taking a break from the joylessness crisis of homeschooling.
But without them by my side, almost instantly I morph into a threat in the eyes of some white folks, instead of being a loving dad to 2 little girls. Unfortunately, all that some people can see is a 6'2", athletically built black man in a cloth mask who is walking around in a place where he doesn't belong, even though I'm the same guy who just wants to take a walk through his neighborhood. It's equal parts exhausting and depressing to feel like I can't walk around outside alone for fear of being targeted. If you're surprised by this, don't be. We live in a world where there is a sizable amount of people who actually believe that racism isn't a thing, and that white privilege is a made-up fantasy to be politically correct. Yes, even despite George Floyd, Christian Cooper, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, and countless other examples before them, and many to come afterward, some people still don't seem to get it. So let me share some common sense points.
Having white privilege doesn't mean that your life isn't difficult. It simply means your skin color isn't one of the things contributing to your life difficulties. Case in point, if it never crossed your mind that you could have the cops call on you, or worse, killed, for simply bird watching, then know that is a privilege that many black or brown people, myself included, don't currently enjoy.
Responding to Black Lives Matter by saying all lives matter is insensitive, tone-deaf, and dumb. All lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. Racism is very real, and please don't delude yourself into thinking it's limited to the fringes. As Amy Cooper proved, it can be prevalent anywhere.
While racism is real, reverse racism is not. Please don't use that term, ever.
In order for racism to get better, white allies are absolutely critical. If you're white, hopefully you care enough to be one of those allies. Please continue to speak up, despite some of your friends and family rolling their eyes at you, because your voices matter to people of color now more than ever.
And if you're still choosing to stay silent about this, then I honestly don't know what to say. If these atrocities won't get you to speak up, then honestly, what will? Also, it's worth asking, why be my friend? If you aren't willing to take a stand against actions that could get me hurt or killed, it's hard to believe that you ever cared for me in the first place.
Hello. In the past few weeks, I've been thinking a lot about responsibility. What it means in an American context, how much of it we have, and even if we do have it, what does that even look like? I certainly do not assume to have all the answers, but I nevertheless would like to share some thoughts on the topic with you all. I want to start by presenting a really fascinating thought experiment conceived by contemporary Australian philosopher Peter Singer about our ethical responsibility to each other. Imagine as you're walking through your local park, you come across a small child who has fallen into a pond and is in danger of drowning. You know that you can easily and safely rescue them, but you are wearing an expensive pair of shoes that will surely be ruined if you choose to do so. We all can agree that it would be seriously wrong to walk on past the pond, leaving the child to drown, because you didn't want to have to buy a new pair of shoes. In fact, most people would think that would be monstrous. You can't compare a child's life with a pair of shoes. It seems obvious when it's posed like this that we all share an immense ethical obligation to help others when the cost to ourselves is merely material. This remains true even when we did not inflict the harm. That is essential. However, the specific societal cognitive dissonance arises when it is not a child drowning in a nearby park, but rather some unknown name in a faraway city being unjustly killed. I present that story as a way of demonstrating how much greater our ethical responsibility is to each other than we often realize. We are equally poised to save both people, yet time and time again, we willingly ignore our responsibility to these faraway, unknown faces. If we want to see a more just and equal society, then this practice has to be fully and entirely eradicated. The story forces us to reckon with the self-evident truth that all lives have equal value, that we are all created equal. That drowning child exists in many places all over this country. We cannot be fooled by the allure of proximity. If you would theoretically be willing to sacrifice your favorite pair of shoes for this unknown toddler in the park, then in practice, we should all be willing to give a little more time and money to the causes we believe in. One individual's actions cannot change the world alone. True, lasting change happens when we gather together to affirm our promise to each other, our promise to strive for a more perfect union. If we want to see societal improvement, we must consciously shift our discussion from ones that are focused on the problems at hand to one that is entirely and completely solution-oriented. Real strength of spirit and of character comes from an ability to quickly and fully refocus on the fight for change. While refocusing on that fight for change may be exceedingly difficult, it is not impossible. It is also undeniably necessary, and it is what I'm asking of you now. It is universally understood that inaction is easier than action. It is easy to destroy. It is hard to rebuild. This fundamental nature of life serves as a conundrum that profoundly impacts our political engagement and our communal dialogue each and every day. We are so focused on what makes us different that we in turn forget to realize at our core, we are the same, human. It is a unity of spirit that should compel us to act on each other's behalf. For a world where my neighbor is richer is a world where I am also richer. We must agree that until the American dream can be realized for all of us, it is realized for none of us. As Americans, we are implicitly entered into a social contract. That contract mandates action of us. It mandates that when we see injustice in the world, we strive to correct it. When we walk down the street, we expect to be safe, we expect to be able to say, believe, and be anything we want, free from persecution at any level. These liberties do not occur magically. They are only feasible when we all agree that they are sacred and choose to actively and passionately fight for their existence for everyone. We are at a rather precarious moment in our country. We are resting between perpetual outrage and the possibility of tangible and impactful action right now, and I urge you all to fight to tip that scale in favor of action. Irish philosopher Edmund Burke famously said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." I wouldn't dare be so bold to claim that bystanders are equally as culpable as perpetrators. However, I conversely would not be so ignorant to claim that bystanders are entirely and equally devoid of responsibility. Certainly do not be a perpetrator. However, do not be a bystander. It is simply inexcusable. Do not do nothing. Rather, be an upstander. When you see injustice in the world, it is your responsibility to correct it. I repeat, when you see injustice in the world, it is your responsibility to correct it. Change happens slowly. It occurs only when lots and lots of hardworking people commit blood, sweat, and tears to their goals day in and day out. If you wish to see that change realized, I urge you to consider this closing question. If not now, when? Thank you.
As Shola Richards concludes, I'll continue to walk the streets, holding my 8-year-old daughter's hand, in hopes that she'll continue to keep her daddy safe from harm. I know that sounds backwards, but that's the world we're living in these days.
Thank you, Mikhail, and Sarah, Noah, and Olivia, and Gavin. At this time, I invite you to pull out a candle if you have one, and to illuminate. In a moment, we will have 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence in memory of George Floyd, for as long as he was suffocated. I invite you to honor that silence in any way that you choose. Thank you. I invite you to extinguish your candles. As we close this evening, just a few notes. We here at Neighbors for Peace would like to continue the conversation in the days ahead. And our first event will be an online conversation about the film Just Mercy, which is streaming free online throughout this month of June on a number of different platforms, justmercyfilm.com. And that conversation will take place on Wednesday, June 24th at 7 p.m. To learn about those events, we encourage you to join the Neighbors for Peace email list. You can pull out your phone right now if you'd like, texting SBORO, S-B-O-R-O, to 66866. Again, that is texting 66866, SBORO, S-B-O-R-O, and we will only ever send you updates from us at Neighbors for Peace. And additionally, you can like our Facebook page, searching for Southborough Neighbors for Peace, and we will send information about the Zoom link for that. This is our great thanks this evening to our speakers, and also to Safdar Medina, Rabbi Rachel Griffiths, Andrea Cirinello, our new minister in town, Charlie Eastman, and Southborough resident extraordinaire, Freddie Gillespie, without whose tireless work this would not have gotten off at all. Thank you. We conclude this evening with a prayer offered by Father Jim Flynn, pastor of St. Matthew Church here in Southborough.
Nobody has spoken more practically than how to become a person of peace than Francis of Assisi. To close, I'd like to offer his prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Thank you for being with us this evening. If you brought masks, there's a table here behind us that you can drop off for the Boys and Girls Club of Worcester. Again, thank you so much for being here this evening. Have a good night.